Hello, everyone. Welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you on Channel 9 and also on WJOPLP Newburyport, Joppa Radio at FM 96.3. We're also live streaming on our YouTube channel at www.ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I'm just delighted to welcome today's guest. Larissa Snorek is here, and she's going to teach us about Christian Science. Larissa has had a practice of Christian Science healing since the year 2000, and she's traveled to more than 20 countries to give talks on the healing power of stillness. She did fieldwork in Africa for 5 years and has a passion for helping people overcome whatever fears and barriers might be making it hard for them to find their true self. She currently is senior editor of the magazines published by the Christian Science Church, and she continues to accept patients in her healing and teaching ministry from around the world. Larissa, welcome, and thank you so much for taking time to visit the morning show.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Mary. Nice to be with you.
Oh, it's great to have you here. I've been curious about Christian Science for a long time, so I'm looking forward to your satisfying that curiosity. And I was hoping that we might begin at the founding of Christian Science with Mary Baker Eddy's story. What do we know about her life before she founded Christian Science, and what was the transformative experience that led her to frame her own personal transformative experience of healing as the science of Christianity?
Oh, well, thanks for the good question, Mary. I can tell you did all your homework and
I try.
Excellent. Really great. No, so yeah, I mean, it is, it's a Christian religion. It was founded in the United States by a woman named Mary Baker Eddy in the Boston area many years ago, in about 1879. And leading up to that point, as you mentioned, she had an interesting life experience, and she grew up in the Congregational church, actually, but she always felt this sense of there being sort of more to a concept of God than she was finding. But she did gain a real deep love of the Bible and of Jesus experiences through her church experience. And what really sort of spurred her into founding her own church was an experience she had when she was bedridden. She had been ill most of her life. She had dealt with chronic illness and chronic pain, and had tried many different wild cures back in the day, including medical, but also water cure, lots of different therapies. And yet one day she had a critical injury and was bedridden, and the doctors pronounced it fatal. And she was just lying in bed and had opened her Bible by herself and was just reading one of Jesus' healings. And she had this experience of just kind of feeling this presence of love sort of wash over her and just kind of encompass her whole being. And at that moment, she got out of bed and she walked across the room and she just felt fine. She felt her whole body felt well. And she recovered completely from the illness that was supposed to be fatal for her. But she didn't really understand what happened. And at that point, she dedicated her life to wanting to understand what had happened to her. How did this happen? How did she recover from this? And so she did. She just studied the Bible and wrote about it and just delved into what is this presence of the divine, of God, that can heal people. How does that work? And she went on to have many transformative experiences, from having to find new homes to losing her, her first husband. Her second husband cheated on her. She didn't have custody of her child. I mean, she went through a lot of turmoil in her life. And yet every moment throughout her life, she just had these transformative moments of continuing to find that there was this presence, this really kind of palpable presence of love that could bring healing and transformation. And she went on not only to experience it herself, but to heal others and to share that with others, because she had this incredible heart for humanity. And then people said, you should write this down, write it in a book. And this is before women could vote. So women writing books wasn't a big deal, but it wasn't a big thing, back then, but she did. And she first wrote the book for everybody. It wasn't really a church, but she soon later on, I guess, realized that she created a church to sort of support the individual spiritual practice of the people that were reading her book. And that's one of the deepest values of the Christian Science Church is that each individual is free to think for themselves
Mm.
and to have their own direct relationship with the divine. And so the church is really just there as a community to support individual spiritual practice. Even today, that's what it's about.
That's such a fascinating story. The way that the kind of spontaneous experience she had of divine love flowing through her body just healed her. And it's, and I can totally understand then that she wanted to understand what was that, what happened. And I think it's entirely to her credit that her instinct was to share, to make that, to study it so she could define it and understand it, and then write it down and share it with the rest of humanity so that people who were suffering, and she, it sounds like, was suffering greatly herself prior to this healing, would be able to participate in that healing experience, and sort of her gift to the world then. And it's interesting that wasn't initially written as a Christian Science text, but that the church kind of developed around what she had written and what she had experienced. Well, I'm so curious then. I mean, I think the thing that Christian Science is in our today's world best known for is the healing and the practitioners of Christian Science healing. And so I'm curious to find out, since this is the work you do, Larissa, could you tell us more? How does a practitioner of Christian Science healing work with somebody who might come to you and say, I really want to heal. How can you help me?
Sure. Yeah. It speaks to the fact, again, that the Christian Science Church, again, focuses on that sense of supporting individual spiritual practice. It's not really about opinion and dogma, but about proof and demonstration. And so Mary Baker Eddy created this structure where we don't have, and I know I'm jumping ahead for you a little, Mary, but we don't have like pastors or priests or really much of a hierarchy in our church. It's lay people that are elected from the congregation to lead the services, to participate. And so the whole structure is really that sort of all of us are practitioners of healing just by studying and sort of dedicating and committing ourselves to that spiritual practice. So in a way, in essence, sort of anyone who studies can be a practitioner of it. And yet there's this sort of a slightly structured process of a practitioner of Christian Science within our practice within the Christian Science Church. And so those of us that are doing that as a full-time endeavor for our work have really just committed to being available to help others with this and to be available to pray with others. So in other words, I work with people who are seeking prayer for healing. And we work with individuals not only in the faith, not just Christian Scientists, but anybody in the public. It's different from maybe a pastor of another Christian church in that a pastor often has a congregation that's like localized, whereas I work with people all over the world. Like I can get emails from Australia or New Zealand or Europe or Africa, and so our congregation in that sense is worldwide. But it is also similar in that it's a ministry. It really is a sense of being sort of ministering to humanity as a practitioner. And yet the structure too is direct with the patient. So it's almost like a psychotherapy practice in the sense that your patients pay you directly. You're not going through a church or an institution or an organization that pays you or that supports you. You're just working directly one-on-one with the patient.
So if I'm understanding you, would it be accurate to describe the role as kind of a mentor and a guide to help the person access their own healing potential inside themselves? Since if I'm understanding you, the potential to open to a healing divine love is within all of us. Am I understanding you, Larissa?
Yes, Mary. I would say that that's really true. That really, even as we can all have our own spiritual practice for all of us, including me, including all of us, it's so helpful to have those mentors, those spiritual teachers that just guide us along the way and have a community of people, almost like a council or something, that just sometimes just kind of supports us. And So I would say that is what I do. And I need that too. So I seek out
Sure.
people to support me, but just like I support others through the practice. And so it's a sense of support for their individual practice, but it's also just really to deepen um, that understanding of the divine. And when
Mhm.
we talk about God, I don't know how many people think of it. Some people who come to my practice come because they have a really oppressive sense of what God is, and it's kind of this
Mm.
separate idea.
Mhm.
And part of what we do is help understand the sense of God, within, the sense of
Mhm.
the presence of love that's already in our
Mm.
part of our being. It's like discovering it in our own selves, in
Mhm.
our own concept of ourselves, that we are sort
Mhm.
of, there's a oneness, it's not a
Mhm.
separation. And so really deepening that.
Yeah.
And I just find human life is so messy at times.
That
And
it is.
there's just so many experiences, and it can be really disappointing, and it can throw curveballs our way all the time. And so there's
Yep.
there's like a never ending um there's like a never ending assignments, like
Yes, that's
things,
yes,
things to heal, things to pray about, things to work on. Like it doesn't end, you know.
yes.
There's not a destination like, oh, I've arrived. Now everything is
You're right.
the minute you've arrived, some new challenge comes around. And so there's just it's great though. I love that work. So that's just
Yeah.
constant
Yeah.
developing and growing. So
Yeah. I mean, you just never know what's coming down the pike. There's only way stations, and for good or ill, you don't know what's coming next. Plenty of occasion for mentorship, guidance, and healing. I very much connect with what you're saying about your role because I'm mostly retired now, but I was a psychotherapist, a clinical social worker in private practice, and I always used to, tell people, I can't solve your problems for you. No one else can, but I can help you find the tools uh, to enable you to work on and hopefully solve your own problems and heal your own sources of pain. And then keep those tools nearby for whatever does come down the pike the next time. So, well, I was curious. In a way, you've already addressed this, but what kind of range of human malaise? I take it it's not strictly, physical ailments like the ones that drove Mary Baker Eddy to her initial foundational experience, but what's the range of things that you find people coming to you to seek some kind of healing for?
well, it's true, Mary. It can be really a wide variety of, so many things, from physical illness and disease to emotional disturbances or family problems,
Mm,
questions of employment or
mm,
purpose or schooling. It can be professional advancement. I've had a number of instances of just sexual attack or sexual
mhm,
abuse and things. It can
yeah.
be just existential anxiety.
Mhm,
It can just be a sense of really understanding yourself better. There's so many.
yeah.
It just goes on and on. There's really no limit to it, and it's not about diagnosing a problem as a
Mhm,
medical practitioner would, or
mhm,
even as a
yeah.
psychologist would. In a
Yeah.
way, it's really about a spiritual awakening process.
Mm,
And
mhm,
so I agree with you how you were saying that it's about giving tools. It isn't
mhm,
like we're not a intermediary, between
mm,
the
mhm,
individual and God. Like it is,
mhm,
when I pray for someone, it's really an affirmation of them being able to overcome barriers or blocks to them
mm,
hearing what they need to hear in their own consciousness
mhm,
directly from that spirit or love or God.
mhm,
And but it is that sort of spiritual kind of support,
mhm,
and that's, but for them to hear their own inspiration, what they need to hear, and to use that. So yeah, I mean, at the heart of the work is just compassion for ourselves
mm,
and for others,
mhm.
and just again overcoming that kind of conditioning that would keep us stuck in patterns of thinking
Yeah,
that aren't serving us. And
right.
sometimes we can't see it for ourselves, and so it's
Yes.
helpful to have somebody else show us that.
Mhm,
And spiritual, the physical healing is really a byproduct of the spiritual awakening. It's like the
mm,
goal for me when I work with someone isn't like I'm going to heal the body, right? That's sort of a,
mhm,
I mean, although that's a a desire or an outcome, but it's really about that sense of spiritual awakening. That's the focus. And then the byproduct of that is that the body changes. So just really briefly, and I've had so many experiences about this myself too, but I had one a couple weeks ago or months ago now, I guess, after a long skiing week, and couldn't walk because I pulled a muscle for a couple of days, but then it just, was able to find freedom and healing from that really quickly. So that was wonderful. But again, it was addressing some things I was holding in my thought. And as I did that, the result was freedom in the body. But a really significant one for me was about 10 years ago when I was dealing with a chronic pain condition. And it got to the point one day right before Christmas where I was in so much agony. I couldn't do anything but just lie in bed and try not to move. It was my shoulders and my neck and the back of my head. And it was just, it had gotten excruciating. And as I just tried not to move a muscle, and I was upset and I was arguing, with myself, and I was really depressed about the pain. But in that day where I just spent praying, as I have known my whole life since I was a kid, of how to pray and to really search and seek for that understanding of God better, all kinds of things came to the surface for me. And as my own mind got quiet, because in Christian Science, again, it's not using our mind to heal us, right? Because it's like our mind is too small to know how to heal us. It's really about quieting our mind, putting it off, to feel this kind of infinite consciousness and to sort of tune in to that. And then thoughts come that are not from our own mind. They're just, and so I that's what happened to me on that day, as I finally, after a couple of hours, was able to just shut up my own mind, and all the anxiety and the worry and the why me, and what did I do wrong that this happened to me, and what, all of these analyzing and all of it. As I finally quieted all that, I just started to hear and feel these ideas of light and love and harmony and peace. And in that process, it uncovered a couple of character traits that I had been harboring, like, oh, I'm really stressed right now, like chronically stressed for the last 5 years when I've been having this condition. And it's because I feel like I have to keep control of everything. And it's because if I feel like if I don't do it, well, it's not going to get done right. So and so it started to illumine this transformation I needed. And I could feel myself not wanting to let go of the way I had been, but I also was struggling and physically in pain. And so throughout that day, I just let it go. It just was like releasing this sense of like, I have to control everything. And in the process, the tension in my body released and just freed up. And by the end of the day, I rejoined my family, but it also never came back. Like, it was such a transformation of character, of thought, of my sense of myself. Like, up until that point, I was like type A, like everything had to get done. I was like, in charge of every single thing. And I just couldn't imagine being any different, but like suddenly I got this glimpse of like, there's a different way of being. And then the result was the physical freedom, and the chronic pain left. I've never had it since, but it was really that spiritual transformation. So again, this applies to anything at all, Mary, but it always really starts with that spiritual change.
Well, that's a great story and a great, I think, example of what I'd asked you before. What is a Christian Science healing experience? And it sounds very vivid, very transformational, very powerful. It also reminds me, I've long thought that there is really no mind-body split, except conceptually. And what you're saying is also there's no mind-body spiritual split, if you can relax into it. And I'm curious to find out, because some of the way that you describe the stillness that you try to get your mind into sounds like trying to reduce, in Buddhism, they call it monkey mind. And so, of course, people read and talk and meditation is very much more widespread now in the West than it used to be. So, what are your thoughts about? Do you see a connection between meditation and prayer as you're describing it?
Mm. I think that prayer in Christian Science is different
Mm.
in that it's not like talking to some deity about what you want.
Mm.
And it's not about hoping that there's some deity out there that will like come and intervene in our lives and make it better. Like that's
Mhm.
not our view of prayer. So prayer in Christian Science probably is more akin to the
Mhm.
quieting of that human mind, which
Mhm.
might be similar to meditation. But it's not only like an emptying, which I know is key in some meditative
Mhm.
practices, but it's really about feeling the unbreakable connection between our true core self
Mm.
and this like infinite presence of divine love,
Yeah.
which we call
Mhm.
God, right? So we call God divine love
Mhm.
and other names, but that's one I
Mhm.
really like.
Mhm.
And so it's really that what sometimes stands in the way of that is our own personality, our own
Yeah.
conditioning, our own
Yeah.
sense of personal history, our own beliefs and fears. And so
Yeah.
examining or sort of unearthing those beliefs and seeing the way that they're false
Mhm.
is actually what the prayer is kind of doing
Yeah.
so that we can see what's really true. And what it means is that it's we use the word I use the word transformation, but it's really
Mhm.
more like realization
Mm.
of what's
Mhm.
already spiritually
Yeah.
true now.
Mhm.
So it's tuning into that spiritual reality, if you will.
Mhm.
And it's less so we may think the outcome we want is like I wanted my body to feel better, right? Like we think
Mhm.
about that as the outcome, but really
Mhm.
the outcome I wanted was peace, contentment,
Yeah.
purpose, harmony. And those are
Mhm.
spiritual things. They can't be found by a job or a person or
Mhm.
moving to a place or getting more money or, I mean,
Right.
that we think those help and maybe
Mhm.
sometimes they do, but they're not the end goal. The
Mhm.
end goal is peace and
Mhm.
contentment. And actually, we don't have to wait for it. Like we can
Mhm.
access it now. And that's
Mhm.
what prayer really does is it puts us in tune
Mhm.
with that reality now. And then the
Mhm.
outcome is things outside of us shift.
Mhm. Absolutely. To good effect.
Yeah.
Clearly.
Oh,
No, that
yeah.
was a great description. Thank you
Yeah.
for that. I
Sure. Yeah.
appreciate that. Well, Larissa, what do you find are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about Christian Science? I mean, you've just done a wonderful job of clarifying what it is and what it isn't. But I know that there are misconceptions out there, and I'm sure that you must bump up against them all the time. So please tell us what are some of the biggest misconceptions you encounter and then dispel them for us.
Sure. Thanks, Mary, for the question. There are, I think, yes, and I grew up in this church.
Mm.
And so I've been hearing them. I grew up in everyone I knew in Chicago where I grew up was Catholic. There was
Mhm.
one Jewish girl, which we sadly knew as somebody who didn't celebrate Christmas. It was just there was a very lack of diversity, like understanding. So there was not a lot of, yeah, acceptance. And so, so yeah, I was the only Christian Scientist and I just knew I was different, And so anyway, there were all these, and so I've heard a lot about things growing up. And so what my friends would tell me is, oh, you're a Christian Scientist. You don't go to doctors, right? So that's what I would hear all the time.
Mhm.
And for some reason, that has become this like touch point that people seem to remember. But um, contrary to common perception, there is no church edict or rule about not going to the doctor. It just doesn't exist. We have great respect for doctors and nurses and their good motives and the compassion they bring, especially this pandemic. We've seen
Mhm.
I've been in tears at times hearing the stories of
Yeah.
like right now of like what doctors and nurses have been doing on the front
Yeah.
lines of the pandemic. I mean, I just, really my heart is like with them. And so no, there's a great love for that work. And at the same time, most of us that are Christian Scientists turn first to prayer for healing, not because we don't want to go to the doctor, we're trying to avoid it, and not even because
Yeah.
we're afraid of it or we're afraid of medicine, but because we've seen it proven. We've seen the effects of this spiritual change and the healing in our life. So
Wow.
that's why we would choose it. I think one of the biggest things going on right now is the controversy around vaccination
Mm.
in America right now, not just
Yeah.
in our, with Christian Scientists, just in our country. And so it seems like it's worth clarifying again that the church does not direct its members on these decisions. Again, our church really exists to serve and support the individual choice and practice of its members. It's not a church that tells members what to do. It's like there's members and the church is here to support, and just to offer inspiration, to be there to provide a community for those individuals to come together and share. So it's very different than a church that would try to dictate or tell how direct their members. We've never characterized our church that way. And concern for public safety and the health of the society is sort of paramount to Christian Science. It's at the heart of what Mary Baker Eddy believed in. Her heart would just almost break when she would see somebody, struggling or having a problem. I mean, her heart would just go out to them, and she would sometimes heal them or offer to, and people would come to her for healing. And so anyway, I know that the public controversy right now surrounding vaccinations is producing very strong opinions. But the church members in Christian Science are free to make their own decisions in obedience to the law, and it's not imposed by the church. And I think that's the biggest thing to correct, is that somehow the church is in charge. It's really the members and their own individual practice that are at the heart of Christian Science.
Well, thank you so much. I think that's so important to clarify, because I think that especially the idea that somehow you're not allowed to go to doctors is totally untrue. And in fact, it's not only untrue, it's antithetical to what the church was founded on and offers people, because it's not dogmatic and it's not a top-down hierarchy. That it respects individuality and autonomy, and those are critical, but it supports individuals' desire to heal and to be whole and complete human beings. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mary. That was a great summary.
Well, you have, because I did my research, a fascinating story of your own. You were brought up in a small minority in Chicago, the Christian Science Church. But I know that you have your own story of your own spiritual seeking that brought you to where you are now. And I was hoping that you would share that with us.
Oh, thanks, Mary. I love that you had this question, because I thought she really wants me to cover this in like 5 minutes. I mean, this could take hours.
Well, what you can.
No, I'm kidding. No, just briefly. I really appreciated your question, Mary, about it. I'll just say briefly, I never saw myself in religious work. I just never pictured doing that. I wanted to work in international development. I got my bachelor's and master's degree in that. I focused on French West Africa, wanted to do field work in other countries, and I wanted to help. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to be an agent of change for the world. That was my passion, and still is. And what I found through consulting work and peace building work and development work, and then as a professor at a graduate school, is that the more I delved into the change process and to this kind of healing the world desire and passion I had, the more I just kept coming back to the sort of spiritual dimension of it all. That I felt like you couldn't divorce material advancement from spiritual transformation. And I started having, graduate students come to me in my individual healing practice, which I had going on sort of part-time. So I had a religious spiritual practice part-time, but I never figured I would dedicate. I always figured I would go do other things. But people would come to me and ask me for help through prayer, and they didn't always even know. They weren't Christian Scientists. They didn't even know what that meant, but they knew what I did. They said, "Can you help me? Because I'm having chronic migraines about, whatever it is." And so then we would pray together and share ideas, and I would see them finding freedom And I
Mm,
have to say, like, I just felt like that was the most rewarding and
yeah.
humbling experience to be part of, to just witness this transformation. And so I just, I don't know, I just felt like seeing that sense of divine presence, of God's presence at
Yeah.
work in people's lives and helping them find that, even if they call it something different. It just, I don't know, it just felt like the most rewarding thing I could be doing. And so um, I still kind of resisted it because I don't know, that's in my, my makeup. Um, but I did finally get asked by the Christian Science Church to go travel all over Africa for 5 years, and that experience, sometimes, Mary, you've probably had this, but sometimes when you have a desire, just by holding that desire and articulating it, it's like it comes about in a
Yeah.
way that you never would have expected. Like you just
Yeah.
never would have
Oh,
planned
yeah, absolutely.
ever. And so that's where I was. I think for 10 years, I had this desire to figure out how to bring together my spiritual practice, which I loved but was not wanting to really go into, and then this international development work, and all of a sudden it just came together,
Yeah.
and in a way I had never conceived or even imagined. And suddenly I just was able to be, I was doing field work in remote rural areas of 10 different countries in Africa, and I was doing it from this place with my heart fully in
Hmm.
the work, at
Hmm.
the heart of my own spiritual practice, and sharing that. And I thought, because I was supporting individual spiritual practice all over these
Yeah.
countries, and I just thought, I was amazed. I was literally humbled and amazed. And so I guess it just propelled me into realizing, okay, dedicating myself to what my heart desires is not going to restrict me. It's actually going to open up things. And I just didn't, I guess I was having a hard time trusting that, but I believe it's really true.
Well, it sounds like a wonderful, first of all, a very gratifying experience for you, but it also sounds as though a kind of a convergence of your heart's desires that finally came together. It's like the different breadcrumbs kind of finally led you to an opening, and you were open to it. So you found it, it found you, kind of a convergence of the two. But it sounds as though happily it's been a very gratifying convergence for you and kind of solidified you on a path that brings you gratification and brings great healing and help to other people really around the world. So thank you for that story. That was a wonderful story, and you did it in 5 minutes.
Okay, good.
Well, you know, in summing up, then, Larissa, I know that many people have found peace and help through Christian Science. Based on your personal experience and the testimony of the many people really around the world that you've worked with, what would you say is the greatest benefit to people of starting to explore Christian Science?
No, thanks, Mary. There's been so many amazing stories I've heard in my life. I just feel so privileged. And like you said, it has been rewarding and really satisfying. It's also challenging. Like, I signed up for this and I know it. It doesn't mean it's easy. Taking a spiritual path does not mean it's easy. And
Yeah.
and I find every day there's, some challenge to confront, and that the world has enough need for healing that, every day there's something else to work on. But I signed up for that, and I do love it.
Yeah.
And I think the moments that are really satisfying are in just, yeah, seeing lives that are touched and hearing people's stories
Mhm.
of healing and transformation, and getting to participate in that feels like a huge honor
Yeah.
and privilege. So what is the greatest benefit? I think just, um, I think it's the benefit to our individual lives that
Mhm.
ripples out into
Yeah.
society. And so while I have good friends that work at the level of like policy, changing the
Mhm.
world through policy, which I love, and I can't get enough of those stories sometimes. because they're sort of working at a macro level. And
Yeah.
and so I do feel like this work is really working at that level of individual change, but that it ripples out to the larger society, and that both are needed, and probably more levels are needed as well. But I'll just tell a brief story of somebody I met in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It was a young woman. And I was asking her, I said, why did you come to Christian Science? Like, what
Yeah.
attracted you? And she said, Laurie, I was in a really big church and it was great, but I never felt like anyone knew me. I felt really anonymous.
Oh,
And she goes, and then a friend invited me to her church, and I went to the Christian Science church, and I immediately felt this sense of family. And I just felt so loved. And she said, and I just kept going back. I never stopped, So, you know, I mean, many people come to it for healing, or they feel like, the greatest benefit is how it heals them. But I think even more than that, it's this sense of community, of family, of feeling that love from others, and that support, and just that sense of being in a community with other people who are seeking to understand every day that there is a divine power, no matter how many times the world argues against it, or would
Mhm.
say that evil has precedent, or that some
Yes.
disaster has now told us that there's no power for good out there. That
Mhm.
it's like all of us are striving day to day to more deeply understand this power of good, and how it is palpable and is a presence that exists for us, and that
Yeah.
can exist for others, um, and to just keep dedicating ourselves to that. And it doesn't mean, as much as we see God as this loving presence, it doesn't. We also have to grapple with redemption.
Mhm.
Redemption is kind of a Christian tenet, and we do have the basic tenets of Christianity, like the Bible and
Mhm.
Jesus and all of those
Yes.
things. And we do have to grapple with our own mistakes, or with oppression in the world, or
Yeah.
injustice, or evil.
Mhm.
I mean, we have to face those things. And
Mhm.
so it's not just about living in a happy love world,
Yeah.
as much as we
Right.
want. We really do have to face down these and grapple with these hard things. But again, it's
Yeah.
giving us tools to do that.
Yeah. And we grapple with them with more energy and more effectiveness when we ourselves feel healed and whole.
Yeah.
So there's a convergence there. So that was a wonderful description of the benefits of exploring Christian Science. And could you tell us then, if people want to learn more, um, where can they start?
Sure. Thanks, Mary. Well, there's a wonderful group that meets right here in Newburyport, Mass.
Mhm.
There's been a church presence, a Christian Science church presence in Newburyport since the 1800s. So they are still going strong. You can find them right in downtown Newburyport, and their website for more information is christiansciencenewburyport.com. So that's a great local resource. But for those of you listening from anywhere else in the world, I encourage you to check out the website, christianscience.com. It has all kinds of resources on it. And as you heard at the beginning, I'm currently editing the magazines that the church puts out. And we just did a huge redesign of our weekly magazine. And the content is free for the next number of months. All the current content is just available for free for a number of months going forward. So you can check that out at Sentinel, like standing sentinel, like sentinel.christianscience.com. And again, you can navigate that site. There's lots of resources there. And there's individuals who work as practitioners all over the world in many, many countries. So you can also find people probably locally where you are to talk to, or who would be happy to support anyone in prayer.
Yeah. Yes, there's a reading room right on Merrimack Street here in
Yeah.
Newburyport,
Yeah.
everybody. Yes, Larissa makes here. And Larissa, you're a wonderful ambassador for the benefits of Christian Science. And I would add that part of my research was looking at some of your YouTube videos that are available to anybody. If you simply Google Larissa Snorek, CSB, you will find your way to the YouTube videos will come up on screen, and you speak very evocatively about stillness. And so I also commend those. Larissa, I can't thank you enough. This has just been fascinating and inspiring to listen to you. You really are a wonderful teacher. So thank you very much for taking time to educate us about Christian Science. And education is clearly in the spirit of Christian Science.
Yes,
So
very
thank
important.
you. I really appreciate your taking the time to visit us.
Oh, it was my
So thank
pleasure,
you.
Mary. Really
Oh,
my pleasure. Nice to see you. Yeah, to be.
my pleasure. Wonderful to see you. And thank you very much.
Yep. Bye-bye.
So that's it for today, everybody. Thanks for watching. I hope you join us next Thursday at 9 on Channel 9 for the morning show. If you miss any part of today's show, it'll be available for viewing on Port Media's YouTube channel playlist for the morning show at ncmhub.org. Just click on the YouTube icon, click on playlist, and then scroll down. Each show will also air on WJOP FM 96.3 on Friday at 8, and then again the following Tuesday at 4 p.m. and Wednesday at 3 p.m. and will also be available as a podcast on the SoundCloud. Just go to ncmhub.org, click on the cloud icon, and then scroll down. That's it for today, everybody. Thank you, Larissa, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.